think we'll get started. We're a couple minutes past 4. Hope everyone can find their seats quickly. Whether you're joining us for the first time today or rejoining us, I'd like to welcome you to the fourth and final symposium in this day of celebrations in honor of Boston University's 10th president, Dr. Robert A. Brown. In this final session, we're going to consider how our university relates to matters of education and diversity in the university and in the world. To lead the discussion, we have two distinguished chairs, Ken Elmore, Dean of Students at Boston University, and Linda Wells, the Dean of the College of General Studies. Ken, you going to start it off?
I will. Thank you. Thank you, David. Well, I hope you all are ready to do your work this afternoon. We are the last session of the day. I'll be a little biased and say the best session of the day. However, that being said, too, we know that you've got your fill of coffee and cookies and all that other stuff. And we know that it could be tough for you to sit through too many papers, too many PowerPoint presentations. You've done your penance for the day, and now we'd like to engage you in some conversation. So I'm going to encourage those of you who are way, way in the back to make sure you get yourselves as far up front as possible. The president is sitting here, and he is lonely, and he would love to have a few of you sit next to him. That being said, I want to talk a little bit about the BU experience and how it relates to this topic. Yesterday was wonderful, and wonderful from the standpoint that I think we got a sense that as you want to understand the BU experience, it's a matter of understanding a little bit about legacy and a bit more about celebrating that legacy. Yesterday, throughout his introductions, Chairman Leventhal talked a little bit about the history of the place. Throughout today, you've heard a bit about the history of the university, the legacy of the university. And certainly, as Dr. Brown spoke of the pillars of the university, certainly learning, excellence, engagement, connectivity, and inclusion were amongst those pillars. You also saw and heard that our students took to this and made me very proud when they offered more than 41,000 hours, almost 42,000 hours of volunteerism and community service to the president as a wonderful, wonderful gift. I think that it's important as we look at this whole notion of diversity, this whole notion of education, this whole notion of what a role might be, a modern role, if you will, for diversity and education in relation to a university, that we look at our own university as a situation where an example was already provided. Consider that in 1839, when the institution was conceived and founded, in 1869, when the university was chartered, lots was going on. Consider that this was a time when immigration reform was something that was a bit of an issue. Industrialization was an issue. Cities and what to do with people in cities, and most certainly the whole issue of slavery had quite a bit of discussion during this period of time. In fact, right here in Boston, there was a great deal of racial violence as it related to that. And then think that three businessmen who did not have college educations, three businessmen who affiliated themselves with their own legacy with the Methodists, and the Methodists, by the way, were engaged in some real struggles about slavery themselves, that they decided to do something that wasn't very PC at the time. They decided that their institution would be one that would be open, God forbid, to those women, to people despite what their religious affiliations were at the time, and most certainly they would let those Africans, whether they had been freed or whether they were people who had already been here before, but the fact is they said anybody can come here if they want to come here. Radical at the time, absolutely radical. And now, as we move along, we know that they set up a great legacy for people. We just talked about DNA to some extent. I think I saw a picture of Dr. Brown and the encoding of DNA. To some extent, that DNA has been here at the university as an example of how an institution can transcend and transform a little bit in the society. Think about the legacy, and you heard yesterday names like Leela Robinson Sawtelle, Helen McGill, Anna Howard Shaw, Edgar Helms has been mentioned, and certainly today he was. And I also hope that you hear the names of Howard Thurman, and we all know certainly about Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Great examples. But again, where's the modern day example for how we deal with transforming the society, particularly around these issues as they relate to pluralism, democratic society, and the purpose of an educational institution like ours? I do want to incorporate a poem by Gwendolyn Brooks into this discussion, in part because our dear provost loves this poem, but I think also as well it says something or gives us a little direction here. Gwendolyn Brooks wrote a piece called We Real Cool. Let me do it for you here, and I can't do it the way she did. We real cool, we left school. We lurk late, we strike straight. We sing sin, we thin gin. We jazz June, and we die soon. Now, I'm a little nervous about having said that with Professor Pinsky sitting in the room. But part of why I think that's a great piece is because when I heard an interview with Gwendolyn Brooks, she talked about this poem. And one of the things she talked about was how it was definitely about education. It was definitely about the underserved amongst us. And it was a look at dropouts who had no pretensions of any glamour whatsoever, dropouts who were uncertain about their identities. And she said that the we, and the reason why she used the we so often was because we needed to think about the we. Not necessarily the pool hall guys that she was talking about, but all of us. She says this is an opportunity for us all to think about how valid we are, and for us all to think about the uncertainty that we encounter when we don't bother to question the things that happen every day. Now, I also like this poem because, for me, it's about jazz, and it's got a feel to it that pulls from a whole lot of places to develop one whole. And so I think a university does that as well. I think this university does it particularly well. And with this legacy, can we figure out what that real cool is all about? What our role is if we real cool, but even more, what should we be doing? I sat through the last session, and let me make a little fun of all the scientists. And I sat there thinking, okay, how do we go after the emerging and the re-emerging problems within a pluralistic world, within our democratic society? As Professor Collins pointed out, does it work here that we look at training from our institutions, the teams we have to put together to try and address these issues that we know are out there? What are the institutional barriers to making sure that we can put it all together? What about ethics and how that relates to the society? And certainly, how do we integrate knowledge and do community outreach on very important issues as they relate to a pluralistic society, diversity, and the role of educational institutions? I think that the Boston University example has been, we can do all that. We can send our graduates out to take care of these sorts of things, and we have indeed transformed and transcended many of the concepts in the society. With that, let me turn it over to Dean of the College of General Studies, Ms. Linda Wells.
Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us on this afternoon. I am sorry to say I have not been able to attend any of the sessions today because I actually had my last open house trying to greet the last crew generating a freshman class of prospective students, wondering if they're going to join us at Boston University for their next 4 years. And I try in my remarks, Ken talked a little bit about the past, I try in my remarks with these students who are 18 years old for the most part, to have them consider the perspective of the gift they are about to be given, what I call subsidized freedom, by their parents, for the next 4 years, the gift they're about to be given of this university education, and especially to get them to think about what a privileged place they hold, what a tiny percentage of 18-year-olds on this planet have the opportunity to go to a residential college, to spend 4 years doing the kinds of things, interacting with us, interacting with texts, interacting with each other. I mean, it truly is a gift, and in that I implore them to see that there is an obligation following that gift when, after 4 years, they step through the door and carry with them whatever their education has come to be. It is true, I think, that they enter an uncertain world, because we hear a lot about the uncertainty of the world they enter. But I dare say that all of us, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, when we graduated, also entered an uncertain world. I graduated from high school exactly 40 years ago. I'm going to my 40th high school reunion this summer. Exactly 40 years ago. And I entered my college years in the 60s with the Vietnam War raging, the civil rights movement in full flower. We were still in the midst of the Cold War. As a baby boomer, I will always be marked by surplus in the job market, and when we hit the retirement, Katie, bar the door. I am a 60s kid, very colored by that, colored in my perspective, and every way that I step into the classroom, I know I am colored by that. And I carry those experiences with me as a teacher. Literary scholar Stephen Greenblatt, in his book Renaissance Self-Fashioning, provides an interesting conceptual framework for helping us understand the formation of perspective and how we each act from our own perspective, albeit a Heraclitan, ever-changing perspective over our lifetime. Greenblatt talks about the ways our perspectives are fashioned by others, specifically the way self-fashioning occurs through the susceptibility to the narratives of others, as we internalize the voices of all of our teachers, whether they be our grandmothers, our high school Latin teachers, Plato, Nietzsche, Gwendolyn Brooks. And we are constantly in that process of self-fashioning. Using the notion of susceptibility to others, we might consider why, for example, and I think Greenblatt actually uses this example, why, for example, Othello is susceptible to the narrative of Iago, while he is deaf to the narrative of Desdemona, the wife he professes to love. Is Hamlet conflicted by, even paralyzed by, the competing master narratives on the one hand of the ancient narrative of what it is to be a great man against the Christian narrative of what it is to be a good man? Why are Ben and Gus, the inarticulate hitmen in Pinter's The Dumbwaiter, incapable of hearing illuminating narratives that would allow them to become agents of their own lives, but remain instead stunted puppets, dumb waiters, capable only of 20-second sound bites of random media details? Each of us as teachers takes into the classroom a set of perspectives. Each of us has been fashioned by a myriad of informing narratives. What we expect in the classroom is that students will engage the texts as narratives, their teachers as narratives, and their fellow classmates with the narratives they bring, to develop a perspective that will allow them to become agents of their own fates, and in some cases, as agents of change in the world they will enter, albeit an uncertain world. We have invited today 4 individuals, all with interesting perspectives, and I'm not going to situate each of them sociologically, so they can do that for themselves, and you can feel free to do that as you speak. Each panelist will offer 1 or 2 points of entry into the conversation about the impact of a university education, especially as that education will allow the bearer of the education to enter an interdisciplinary world, a pluralistic and diverse world. What would it mean to be effective in that world? So let me just introduce very briefly our panelists, and they're either going to sit or come up to the podium one at a time as you see fit, and give some brief remarks, and then we'll open it up for discussion. Ted Landsmark is President and CEO of Boston Architectural Center and has served as trustee to numerous arts-related foundations, including Boston's Institute of Contemporary Art and the Museum of Fine Arts. Dr. Landsmark is an alumnus of Boston University with a PhD in American and New England Studies. Kay Hodge is a partner at the law firm of Stoneham, Chandler, and Miller. She practices labor and employment law and is chair of the American Bar Association's Commission on Racial and Ethnic Diversity. Attorney Hodge is also an alumna of Boston University School of Law. Charles Glenn is a fellow of the University Professors and professor and chairman of Administration, Training, and Policy here at Boston University School of Education. Professor Glenn served as Director of Urban Education and Equity Efforts for the Massachusetts Department of Education, where he oversaw the administration of state funds for magnet schools and desegregation. And finally, Shahala Hari is Associate Professor of Anthropology and Director of Women's Studies at Boston University. She has conducted field work in her native Iran and in Pakistan. She has published extensively on Islamic fundamentalism and women's rights. So if each of you would cue the talent, fade up the audio. All right.
I was told before I came up that as a lawyer who now runs the largest architecture school in New England, if I came before you and said that the best thing we could do would be to tear down the law school building and replace it with something more compatible with the rest of the campus, I'd probably win a lot of friends. But I'm not here to talk about that. Maybe later. But I will say a couple of things about diversity and my own role here at BU. I was in the American Studies program studying American furniture about a decade ago. And one of the challenges that the then faculty member faced was the fact that the student body was in fact diversifying in ways that it really hadn't prior to that time, and that there were some real challenges that he faced in getting students to understand the economic differences between the Connecticut River Valley on one hand and Portsmouth on the other, New Hampshire, and how that might affect furniture styles. And so we were all challenged to figure out how we could get a group of primarily Asian students to come to an understanding of what the 18th century economic differences were in a part of the world that many of us felt that we understood well. On the other hand, what we were challenged to do was to come to a clearer understanding of how Japanese and Korean joinery techniques made it possible to assemble chairs and pieces of furniture without either glue or nails. And through the dialogue that we entered into around all of that, diversity played a significant role in our coming to understand different kinds of influences on the evolution of American furniture. Diversity is not just about broadening the realm of who attends the university, but it is also about bringing new perspectives to our understanding of our existing curricula, because we all bring, as has been suggested, very different perspectives to our understanding of the same subject matter. I'll just say sociologically, I grew up in the projects in East Harlem with just my mother. I represent a demographic that presumably is not supposed to graduate from universities, let alone getting 2 professional degrees and a doctorate, as I did from here. And I tend to bring somewhat different perspectives to a lot of the discussions that I now enter in. And while my viewpoints are not necessarily superior to anyone else's viewpoints, as I look at this audience, as I look at most of the world that I operate in, I think that more people who express the kinds of viewpoints that I tend to bring to discussions would be useful to have in terms of our conversations. So for me, that's the essence of diversity, but I assume that you're all here because you take that pretty much for granted. And if you don't, I hope that you'll speak up in our dialogue so that we can hash it out and have some useful conversation. So I won't talk about the broad sense of why diversity is important, but I will speak to actually 3 concerns that I have in terms of my most recent experiences in terms of trying to address issues of diversity. One is that, And I also want to commend BU at this point. I was actually a little surprised to hear yesterday of the very wide and deep range of activities that the university has been involved with, and I want to commend the students in particular for generating the 40,000 hours of community service, because I think that that was quite extraordinary, and in fact is not something that we see at most of our universities these days. And yes, you did it for your new president, and yes, you did it for the university, but you really did it for yourselves, and you know that. You did it for the communities that the university saves, and I think that that's a very important thing. And I, as one person who lives in one of those communities, I can't thank you enough. In terms of the three concerns I have, I would note that many of our initiatives tend to be more input assessed than outcomes assessed. That much of what we do in terms of moving forward with and addressing issues of diversity speaks to the effort we make and speaks much less to the actual outcomes of that effort. And in that regard, I will make a comment about the architectural profession, where I've served for the past few years as head of the American Institute of Architects Diversity Committee. In 1968, Whitney Young, who was then head of the National Urban League, chastised the architectural profession because only 1% of all of the licensed architects in the United States were African American, and it was an equal percentage, roughly, of Latinos. In the year 2006, 1.5% of all of the licensed architects in the United States are African American. That despite millions of dollars that have been spent by the Ford Foundation, the American Institute of Architects, and many design schools to try to increase the diversity of the profession. That suggests that as much as we have been willing to commit to and look at the input side of trying to increase diversity, we don't always necessarily assess the outcomes that emerge from that. I'll give one other quick example. I served as one of the first chairs of the board of the Boston Arts Academy, a group that was brought together by a number of college presidents in this immediate area. And one of our goals with the BAA was to diversify demographically and in terms of economics and certainly in terms of race, the numbers of people entering the arts in this part of the world. The reality is that after 5 or 6 years, and this is not a critique of the Arts Academy so much as it's a critique of our own assessment abilities, the Arts Academy has in fact graduated many students who've gone on to a variety of schools. Most of them have not come to the schools that were the founding partners that created the Arts Academy, and very few of the Arts Academy graduates have yet graduated from art schools. And there are reasons for that, but the problem is that we don't often assess outcomes, and we don't often make the determination of what it is we're trying to accomplish in terms of our interventions on the basis of what succeeds in terms of outcomes, and more importantly, in terms of what fails. So the second point that I would make is that many of us as institutions are operating independently from one another in terms of what we know about what works and what doesn't. There's lots of research that goes on in the realm of diversity in our ed schools, our sociology departments, our psych and anthropology departments, our business schools. There's lots and lots of research that goes on. Most of it's not shared as among us. And most importantly, most of it's not shared in terms of what doesn't work. And so we have a tendency to replicate each other's failures in a continuing way that fails to change over a period of time exactly the sets of internal cultural things that need to be changed in order to affect diversity in our realms. We don't know enough about the very research that we do that's designed to affect diversity. And so, among other things, one of the best things we could probably do is to start to talk to each other more, to be a little bit less proprietary about what we think we know about changing diversity, and to start to share some information on what works and what doesn't. And then the third point I'd make is that I think that to a large extent we've done, particularly in this region of the world, an inadequate job of celebrating our more diverse leaders. Within our universities and the like, one can look at university leadership and one can see that there are individuals who are successful individuals in some of our departments. I'm often mistaken for a well-known department head in Cambridge. But you know, there are lots of other folks doing a lot of interesting things as well. And what's interesting about diversity in this part of the world is that we like to think of ourselves as being highly progressive. And yet we haven't sent a woman to Congress in 25 years. We haven't sent an African American to Congress or to the mayor's office in this city in 25 years. We like to think that we're very diverse, but in fact we're not. And we like to think that, in fact, many of the things we do are designed to not just celebrate a small handful of individuals, but in fact to identify and celebrate a wider range of individuals of multiple ethnicities who are, in fact, the emerging group of leaders in our communities. But the reality is, whether it's through our media or through our nonprofit organizations or through a range of other vehicles that we have where we can talk about who it is we want to raise up, the fact is that we fail to celebrate and to identify those individuals who are in fact the next generation of leaders. And to the extent that we haven't diversified that sense of who can be a leader in this community, we haven't created the role models for those people who would follow. So I would submit to you that one of the primary obligations that we have as among ourselves is to look at some of the young people who are our emergent leaders in our communities and to begin to celebrate them in ways that we haven't in the past so that they can, in fact, begin to lead. I would conclude with those remarks. I think that we'll get into some interesting dialogue after all of that. But the last comment I would make is that as one of the few folks to graduate from Boston University and immediately end up taking a job as a college president, I would have to say that I place great value in my doctorate from Boston University's program in American and New England Studies, and I believe that there are more who should share in that value. Thank you.
Gee, maybe I should come and get a PhD at Boston University and then I can move on. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. I know Linda introduced me as being a graduate of the law school, and I am, and very proud of it. But I'm really what they call a triple terrier, because I received 3 degrees from this university. The first is from what used to be called the College of Liberal Arts, CLA. The second was from the law school, a Juris Doctor, and then I got my master's also from the law school. And I have always been proud about the fact that Boston University has a historic commitment to issues of diversity, and from its founding has cared about diversity. I have to say that in the context of the fact that as a lawyer, I recognize that I represent a lawyer of color, one of only 10% of our entire profession. And that is an appalling statistic, because lawyers hold the key to the justice system. We are the folks who help to decide whether someone's going to keep their liberty or not. And the fact of the matter is we need more diverse lawyers. I'm proud to say, however, that the Boston University School of Law has at least 25% of its student body comprised of students of color. And that is the highest percentage in this area. On the other hand, though, that's only 25% of the small number of students who are in this law school. And nationwide, it is an incredibly increasing problem. In particular, I would say, and to follow up on some of the comments of Ted, we're losing African American males. And we don't have any some law schools have no African American males, although they have students of color. And so we need to really spend some time figuring out, and I encourage certainly this institution to follow some of the entreaties that Ted brought to you about being able to evaluate what's going on. Both African American males and Hispanic males are not going to law school, and that's a real problem. And we as a society will pay for that problem going forward. But I am not here to talk about the diversity within just my profession. And I'm here to really challenge the university in the context of my belief that diversity is hard work. And I'm just hopeful that, Dr. Brown, that you allowed diversity to be on this Symposia agenda is a tribute both to you and also it gives me great hope for the future. For those of us who are Boston University, and Boston University is a piece of paper in the Secretary of State's office, it is the people who are here in this room and out there along Commonwealth Avenue who make up this incredible institution. It is for us to work to be known as an institution that is not only committed to diversity, but that is innovative about common sense approaches to diversity. As a lawyer, I've spent a considerable amount of my time on committees and commissions attempting to address questions of equality of access to our courts and diversity within my profession. My participation in this work has led me to certain conclusions and beliefs, and that is that the success of our pluralistic society depends on education, and that is the work of institutions such as this university and many others. I want to share with you two ideas that I have had for a long time about how higher education's obligation to a pluralistic society can be met. In particular, I suggest to you that students educated at institutions like Boston University should be educated about our democracy and about the diverse cultures and language that make up our communities and the world. My first suggestion is at the undergraduate level. It is that we must ensure that all students have an understanding of our Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Regardless of whether you see America as a melting pot or as a mosaic of different races and cultures, America's existence and success is a testament to a fundamental core value of our country, and that is the values embodied by our Constitution, and more specifically, the Bill of Rights. Unfortunately, however, the Associated Press recently reported on a survey conducted by the McCormick Tribune Freedom Museum that 1 out of 4 Americans are not able to name more than a single right protected by the First Amendment to the Constitution. That same survey determined that twice as many, or 52% of those respondents, could name at least 2 of the Simpsons on the Simpson cartoon series. That is an extraordinary statement, and it is something that I think we need to think about. Talk about our democracy and the rule of law should not be limited to our law schools, but must be a part of the general education of anyone who wants to call him or herself educated. I hope that Boston University could take a leadership role in this area to ensure that every student, including those who will be our future teachers, business persons, doctors, and just general leaders, understand the Constitution and Bill of Rights, and understand that it is that Constitution and the Bill of Rights that forms the core values of our society, the core values that allows us to be concerned and to care about diversity, equality, tolerance, and understanding. It is my hope that we'll be able to start a movement that will change the survey results and so that folks will know at least the Bill of Rights. They can know the Simpsons, but I want them to at least understand the core values on which this country is based. My second suggestion is at the graduate level. We must provide opportunities for our graduate students to maintain and or obtain the ability to communicate effectively in our global community and to learn about diverse cultures. While most institutions of higher education offer and some even require that undergraduates take 1 or more foreign languages, our graduate schools do not even offer students the opportunity to continue to develop their knowledge and facility with that foreign language. For example, I'm going to return to my roots, the law school. Although most law students studied a foreign language before law school, there's really no realistic opportunity for those students to continue to use the language to maintain their fluency. In addition, law school is, in part, learning the language of the law. However, absolutely no effort is made to train law students to translate those legal terms into the foreign languages and the languages of their future clients and their future clients in business dealings as well as individual representation. Therefore, while it's imperative that lawyers understand the meaning of legalese in English, we don't follow through on that training, although we know that many of them will be expected to represent clients who don't speak English and also rely on and end up relying on translations or interpreters who were never trained in the law in the first place. Lawyers who are able to speak the language of their clients will be more effective advocates for them. Knowledge of foreign languages is also essential as more and more business is conducted on an international basis. Not just lawyers, and I'm not just talking about lawyers. I'm talking about your graduates of the business school, the graduates who are doctors, who are dentists, and even graduates of our technology schools, because all of them would benefit from the opportunity to continue to develop fluency and to develop a vocabulary in their fields. Because when they were in undergraduate school, many of them were learning their languages in literature and not in their specific fields. Conversely, many of the students who are from foreign countries would similarly benefit from opportunities to learn to communicate more effectively in English. My son was a graduate student in the School of or the College of Engineering, and he was in a class which had a lot of foreign students, and many of them had great difficulty. They had passed the exam but had difficulty communicating effectively, and many of them sought positions in American corporations. And once again, it can go both ways. The ability to work effectively in a global world requires an understanding of diverse cultures and language. We should teach about not only the language but also the cultures and make all of it easier for graduate students to obtain. I would hope that graduates of Boston University would be as distinguished, not only for their technical knowledge and skills, but also for their understanding of culture and language. Boston University has been a leader in diversity since its founding. It is my hope that we will continue in the tradition by becoming an innovator that recognizes that the need for all to understand both the core values of our democracy and the need to learn about and understand the cultures and languages in our pluralistic world. Thanks.
Great, thanks.
Well, I don't know. I think maybe the scientists were having more fun than we are. I should begin with a few jokes, but I don't feel up to it in this distinguished company. I suppose what most qualifies me on this issue is that I have 7 children, all of whom went through the Boston Public Schools. For 30 years straight, I always had at least one child attending the Boston Public Schools. I thought I deserved a gold watch, but Tom Pezant has not been willing to come through, I'm afraid. Often, those children of mine, one or another of them would be the only white child in a class otherwise entirely made up of Latino and African American children. And so they learned firsthand the kind of experience which many students of color experience at Boston University and other institutions like this. That is, how it is to be isolated and needing support. I could try to talk about the issue of how to increase the diversity of students in this university, and that is certainly an important issue. It's the kind of thing which, in my 21 years in Massachusetts government responsible for educational equity, I spent most of my time working on. How do you increase access? How do you make equal opportunity real and not just words? But fortunately, I can leave it up to others here to deal with that issue, because as a teacher at Boston University, my great concern, my passionate concern in recent years has been how we deal with the diversity which we already have in this institution. This is an enormously diverse institution. in terms of the hundreds of careers that students are aiming for, the scores of nations from which they come, the enormous differences in family background, in languages spoken at home, obviously in race and ethnicity. All of these things make this a marvelously rich environment, but one in which also we need to be very careful to ensure that our teaching, our curriculum, the ways in which we come to terms with diversity become real and supportive. I teach a course in the summer. Actually, I begin it in about less than 2 weeks, I suppose, on diversity and justice in education. And I find that the students are generally very comfortable talking about diversity in a kind of a feel-good way, but they get a little nervous when we get to the justice part of it. This is, I think, what Ted was referring to, that it's one thing to have an institution which is open to differences. It's another thing to have an institution which deals with differences in a way which produces real opportunity, real results. And it seems to me that this is the challenge that we face. Now, the first, I want to offer just 2 assertions, and then during the discussion time you can attack me about them. The first is obvious, no one will disagree with this, that we need to show respect for differing viewpoints. But note that race is not a viewpoint. Sex and ethnicity and handicap are not viewpoints. They often, of course, have a powerful effect in shaping how someone views the world, and we need to recognize that. But it's not up to us as teachers to tell our students what worldviews they should hold, how they should understand their lives, how they should set goals for themselves on the basis of their racial or other identities. Our job is to listen respectfully, to probe gently but persistently, and to refuse to accept intellectual shortcuts in our students or in ourselves. We should expect to be surprised. Often the basis for these viewpoints or worldviews is ultimately religious, and I think university faculty have particular difficulty dealing with religiously based convictions. It makes many of us nervous. And yet, to talk about culture without talking about the fact that many cultural differences in this world are sustained by religious convictions, religiously based understandings of the meaning and purpose of life, is to miss the point almost entirely. I would, by the way, recommend strongly the new book, which I've been waiting for years, of Philip Rieff, called My Life Among the Death Works. Rieff, who wrote Freud, The Mind of the Moralist, and The Triumph of the Therapeutic many years ago, books I read in college almost 100 years ago, has a new book out summing up his later reflections. And it goes precisely to this issue, the shallowness of the way in which we tend in today's university culture to address questions and differences that go all the way down. Differences that go all the way down, that are not simply at the level of different customs and foods and things like that, which we're usually quite comfortable in talking about. My other assertion is that precisely because of the extraordinary diversity of the students with whom we work and for whose success we have such high hopes, we must give careful attention to what should be common about their education. And here I would support precisely what we just heard. It's essential that they understand the fundamentals upon which our life together is based. It's essential that they have some grasp on the common culture which we share in this country, which admittedly is a culture which is constantly ramifying, constantly taking on new forms as immigrant groups create new forms of culture, not simply importing what they came with, but inventing new ways of understanding the world and sharing that with all of us. That engagement with what we have in common, as I say, that is a moving target, it doesn't stand still, is essential. And we owe it particularly to those of our students who are most likely to be marginalized in this society, who are most likely to find it difficult to be successful, difficult to fully engage with the society and with opportunities and with citizenship. We owe it particularly to them to be sure that we do not neglect to give them that foundation in what we hold in common. We owe them instruction, but we also owe them education in the broader sense of the term. Those words in English often are used interchangeably, but in French or Spanish or in German, other languages, they have quite distinct meanings. Instruction is learning how to do things, learning about things, and that's extremely important. One of the things which the university owes to its students is to make them competent to function in this world, in this life, in whatever profession they're choosing to prepare for. Education, however, goes beyond instruction. Education is the shaping of the human being. Always, of course, something which must be done with extreme sensitivity, with care, because it is not our business to decide what sense of the meaning of life our students will acquire. And yet, it is our responsibility to convey to them that wrestling with those questions is the most important thing they will ever do. And that what we are about is a place where those questions are taken with enormous seriousness, a place where education and not just instruction occurs. 3 of my own children have completed the CAS core curriculum in recent years, and in fact, a 4th of my children was just admitted, I'm happy to say, to Boston University, to CAS. I've been much better satisfied with their educational experience in the core curriculum than I was with my own education at Harvard 50 years ago now. I've had the pleasure of teaching a freshman core course in the uni program and teaching a number of times a core program for doctoral students at the School of Education. I found in both contexts students eager to address the kinds of questions that go to fundamental meaning, questions that go all the way down, not just the superficial questions of technique. In summary, then, I urge that we say yes to a growing diversity of students and faculty, especially with regard to the free play of ideas drawn from many different sources and traditions. That we say yes to a habit of listening carefully and with respect to the ways in which our students and our faculty colleagues express what is most important to them. That we say yes to effective preparation for specialized careers, the hundreds of different ways in which we are doing that, new forms of specialization, including those which are cross-disciplinary, as we heard, with respect to the sciences, which are constantly emerging, but also that we say yes to a renewed emphasis on education of our students and thus necessarily of ourselves as human beings, to an appreciation of what we have in common and thus what allows us to live and work together to be friends in all of our glorious diversity.
Hello, everybody. Here we are at the end of the day. I don't know whether it is good or bad to be the last person of the day in the last panels. I hope I have something to say that is of interest to you. Let me first begin by saying how delighted I am to be part of the festivities celebrating the inauguration of President Brown. And I want to congratulate him and Dr. Beverly Brown and ourselves. And I think that bodes well for diversity. Now, I would like to talk a little bit about diversity and in Boston University by way of sharing you some concrete examples from my own background and my students and my classes. But to situate myself sociologically first, let me say that I was born in Iran, and I'm a granddaughter of an Ayatollah. Not all Ayatollahs are bad, but of course, how diverse can you get, you know? Now, I left Iran after I finished high school a long time ago. So at this point in my life, I'm more of Bostonian than Tehranian, though I feel quite comfortable in both places. When I first came to BU in 1993, and I went to a huge class that I was assigned to go to, I was given a list of the students. And I am usually determined to learn my students' names. So in the first 2 or 3 sessions, I usually read out the names of my students. So I started reading the names. And after struggling through several difficult last names, I stopped, I looked up, and I said, well, a good thing about being in a cosmopolitan university like Boston University is that I'm not the only one with a strange last name. And then in that class and in many classes since then, I felt to be one with a strange or a different last names among many. And I think in that sense, we all feel pretty well at home. Now, to me, Boston University, as was just said, represents a microcosm of a global village in its literal sense of the word, not in its homogenizing and globalizing sense of the term, but with all that the concept of a global village potentially entails. That is to say, in terms of bringing together a multiplicity of diverse cultural, religious, ethnic, linguistic, and racial traditions. And in terms of facilitating learning for these young adults who are at the most formative stages of their lives. That is to say, we try to teach them the fine arts of living in a civic and democratic community. I also want to acknowledge Boston University's international and study abroad programs, where American students are sent to farthest corners of the world into other villages, other communities, and among other peoples. Here, too, students find a unique chance to live in the shoes of others for a while and to learn from those whose experiences, beliefs, and perspectives are different from their own, and to learn to develop their intellectual faculty and refine their personality, and hopefully to go on to become caring and desirable citizens. Now, to come to some of the concrete examples that I would like to tell you about, I teach cultural anthropology. I teach, in fact, legal anthropology, but I won't be talking about that, though I would be very happy to talk about it later on during our discussion sections. But as you may know, anthropologists study the cultural uniqueness and specificities of other cultures, and they understand that through the study of people's daily life experiences, rituals, belief system, kinship system, political system, economic system, and as was said, I think this morning or in the earlier sessions, what motivates people to do what they do. Anthropologists are particularly sensitive towards natives' point of view and would like to wear the shoes, shall we say, of the natives in which they walk. Given that we live in a very diverse city and community, I usually ask my students in my senior seminar on theory and method, to conduct fieldwork among a religion other than their own. And the students have taken on this with zest, and we have studied Greek Orthodox, Zen Buddhism, Sikhs, Hinduism, Jewish Orthodoxy, Islam, Roman Catholicism, and all the way. Now, I want to give you about one particular example. I have many examples to give, but I want to give you just one example to see how diversity can work and how people can learn to appreciate other people's perspectives and points of views. Now, one young woman in my class decided to study Muslims, and she went to the Quincy Mosque, and as a form of respect, she puts on a scarf. And by the way, I have to tell you, not all Muslim women would veil. And when I told you my grandfather was a good Ayatollah, he never forced us to wear the veil. So neither me nor my mother nor anyone else in my family put on a veil. But there are many, of course, who do so, and that's very important to understand. So she puts on a scarf, a long skirt, a long-sleeve shirt, and she went there. Not only she went and participated in the activities of this mosque, but she continued wearing her scarf and long skirt and long sleeve shirt throughout the day. As she rode the subway, she went shopping, she talked to people, and she came to the class. Now, I had asked my students to come to go and do the studies and come to the class and give presentations on their findings and to share that with the other students. Often the students came to the class in the attire of the particular group they studied. And it was very interesting to see how they became creative in that. This particular young woman came to the class to give her presentations with her scarf on. So by conducting this brief experience with difference and diversity, she learned, and I hope, a valuable lesson in respect, tolerance, and civic relations. Now, what did she learn, and how did we discuss these activities? I think she, and through her communications with other students, learned to challenge and confront her own stereotyped preconceptions about the other, in this case meaning the veiled women. She rendered the difference, in quotations, of Muslim women familiar for her own fellow students. And in that sense, she humanized the veiled Muslim women and their experiences. She learned to sympathize and empathize with the discomfort that some veiled Muslim women experience when people stare at them in the streets or in the subway or in the shopping stores. She created a bridge, I think, and I hope, a linkage between the mosque and the university, making the people within both communities to become aware and understanding of each other. She learned to be tolerant and respectful without losing sight of her own specific cultural identity. And this is very important. Diversity and inclusiveness does not mean the erosion of one's own identity. In fact, by becoming aware of the diversity within and the differences among us, the students learn to refine and reaffirm their own sense of identity and belongingness. Whether coming to BU with different backgrounds from other parts of the world or from various places within the United States, or to travel abroad to other communities across the globe, BU students learn important lessons and often life-changing experiences from those whose cultures and traditions, rituals and beliefs, practices and perspectives are different from their own. They learn to choose negotiations rather than confrontations, to communicate effectively, and to work closely with people from varied backgrounds. Or at least we do hope they do. Now, I would like to say a few words about the importance of the role of teachers. As we all know, teaching is a process, as is the learning. Now, the role of the educators and teachers in these critical years, when young adults form their identity and build their careers, what was called the self-fashioning, is to help them to realize their common educational goals and societal objectives. to teach them to learn to think critically about issues, to stand up for justice and equality. I think it is very important to teach them about justice, to respect freedom of speech, to be tolerant of the strangeness of the others, and to be supportive of plurality and to celebrate diversity without losing sight of their own uniqueness and differences. To help them build democratic communities whose members are judged by the quality of their characters and their contributions. Let me finish by some comments I heard that were attributed to the former President John Silver. He is reported to have said that there are more Catholics at Boston University than at Boston College. There are more Jews at Boston University than are at Brandeis. But we can say there could be, and there aren't yet, many Muslims, Hindus, Sikhs, and of course to come back to the race, African Americans, people of other socioeconomic classes, and also diversity among the faculty, the gender diversity that we very much like to see in this place. And that brings me to the last point that I like to make, and I won't actually elaborate on that, hoping that we can do so during our question and answer. That brings me to the whole issue of women's studies at Boston University. Here I am, the director of women's studies, and I'm very proud of it. But it may come as a surprise to you that it was established formally in 2001. We are trying still to bring ourselves to the mainstream of the academic community at Boston University and to get out of the ghettoized image that often women's studies have. And in fact, I very much like, we are very interdisciplinary, of course. After this earlier session, the interdisciplinary now needs to be a lot more defined. But I think we would like to be diversified in the sense that we would like to have more men in women's studies. Thank you so much.
To keep us on track in terms of time, but we would like to open this up for some kind of commentary, questions of our panelists. Thank you, the four of you, for one thing, for providing these perspectives. What would you like to say? What might you like to ask? Okay, it's 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon. Yes. Use the mics. Yes,
Linda,
Gloria.
we tend to think of diversity in terms of gender and culture and those sorts of things, race. But one thing that I just want to add to the discussion here is that another aspect of diversity is also disability. And I haven't heard anybody talk about that, but I think that that's a really important thing for us to think about in the university setting here, and also just in terms about thinking about differences across people.
Thanks, Gloria. Any commentary?
I just mentioned, I don't know how
it's on. I think it's on, maybe.
In my prepared text, I included disability, but I lost my place. Mm-hmm. You're absolutely right, and one of the things that is most challenging about that is that disability often has the effect of separating students from their fellow students, and how to make all the students comfortable in relation to those of their classmates who have disabilities is a real challenge, which I think we need to work on more.
Thank you. Questions?
Dr. Landsmark, if you could just give us a word or two. You certainly overcame incredible odds to create a life of giving to other people. And I'd just love to hear a little bit, I'm sure other people would as well, about the source of confidence that you had inside of you, or the support that you must have found around you through a family member in order to excel the way you did against tough odds.
Well, just a quick response on that. When I took some courses at a local ed school, one of the things that was pointed out to me is that there's some interesting studies that have been done on success patterns, particularly for kids coming from disadvantaged so-called communities. And the key to success in some of those studies was the aspiration level of a child's mother more than anything else. If your mom wanted you to make it, the odds were good that you would. And in my case, my mom wanted me to make it. She pushed and cajoled and saw to it that as a kid growing up in New York, we went to museums, that we got to libraries, that we went out to the old polo grounds to look at auto races and rodeos that were there, that we went to baseball games and track meets, and that I saw things in the world that were beyond the limits of 123rd Street and First Avenue. I think that knowledge, for example, has worked for me and actually worked for the city when I worked in the mayor's office, and we were trying to identify ways of reducing patterns of violence in the city. We were able to determine that if we could get to violent kids' mothers, that in fact we had more influence over some of the kids who were more likely to pull a trigger than if we simply said, oh, we're going to put you in touch with your basketball coach. So in my own case, it was a very strong-willed mother who celebrated her 85th birthday just a week ago. And I think that in my case and in other people's cases, to the extent that one can identify those sort of recurring factors that help to inspire and continue to encourage young people towards patterns of success, we're more likely to be successful in terms of the kinds of interventions that we exercise, not just in higher ed, but I think more importantly in middle schools and below.
I really appreciated all the panelists' remarks, and I found myself wondering whether it would be wise for a university to try to define diversity. I can see drawbacks and benefits on both sides. On the one hand, if you don't define it, I guess it can mean as many different things as people want to make it mean. If you do define it, you might do so in an exclusionary or limiting way. So I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts about that.
I would just say, particularly in reference to the comments I made about outcomes, that if you're, I mean, we're all scholars here, right? Or at least we aspire to be. If you haven't determined what the limits of your subject and issue may be, you can't very well know what it is you're trying to affect. Diversity obviously is a moving target because it encompasses more and more things the more we understand the world. And I think that if a university in particular is interested in increasing its diversity, which implies both quantitative and qualitative outcomes from the interventions that one would embark upon, you have to do that within a context of definition. You have to decide where you want the place to be in 5 years or 10 or 20. And not all of those outcomes are necessarily going to be numerical outcomes. At the Arts Academy, we may not have produced very many practicing artists, but we know we've increased sensitivity and knowledge of the arts in people who are going out into other fields. And even within the context of a university, you want to use certain numerical factors to be sure, but you also want to be diverse in the way you look at qualitative outcomes for your interventions that make the university community a richer community. And that requires definition.
If I could, I just think that one thing has to be sort of a bottom line issue, and that is, I think race and gender in particular are two very defining differences in people. Many, regardless of your race, you might have a disability. Regardless of your race, you may have an alternative sexual orientation. The fact of the matter is, though, you have to recognize certain basic issues, because if you don't recognize the importance of race in this country, I think you sort of miss the mark. You could be worried about all sorts of other issues, and open-mindedness, which is really what we're all talking about. I'd rather not talk about the word tolerance, because I just don't want to be about the, I will tolerate you.
I want you to respect me.
But we want it to be a broader issue than just, quote, tolerance. It's a method of thinking and understanding and receptivity to a variety of different issues. And it may very well be that tomorrow the issue of diversity will be quite different than any of the prior issues. Unfortunately for us, I think as a society, the issues of diversity continue to be on the plate, and the plate's getting real crowded. And I would be very, I think that we need to be challenged by the fact that we haven't really started to resolve some of those very basic and fundamental questions. And we need to at least come up with a methodology for approaching them. I think numerics would be helpful. But we've got to get beyond just feeling good that we're trying and really try to figure out how to get some of the things off, or at least move them to a different place on the plate. And then we can take more and more things onto it. But at this point, we haven't resolved some of our most deepest and hardest issues.
Let me add a word about that, because 10 years ago I brought out a book about how 12 countries educate immigrant children. And one of the things that struck me was that in none of the other Western democracies did the government keep statistics on the race and ethnicity of students. And having been in the business for many years of collecting and using the racial and ethnic statistics from Massachusetts schools as a means of trying to identify areas where there were problems and where interventions were needed, I found something rather attractive about societies which could simply overlook those labels and say, no, we're going to deal with children as children. Now, 10 years later, seeing what is occurring in Western Europe makes me realize that probably we were wise to recognize that, as my colleagues have said, you cannot simply blind yourself to the continuing significance of those categories. Having said that, I think we need also in universities to work very hard at diversity of viewpoint, at diversity of ways of understanding the world. There we have not always been so good. This is what we call political correctness. That is the impatience toward alternative ways of understanding reality. I think we need to respect and make space for that kind of diversity as well.
Ken, maybe
We can take one
more
more
question.
or comment.
Okay. Yes, Esther.
If you could talk into the mic so we can record that.
I wanted to ask, by your discussions of diversity, are you suggesting that the university should have a colorblind, gender-blind admission process?
Well, I'm not in any position to say that, but I'm not suggesting that. I think it is important to be aware of the gender and race and class, but I'm not, well, but that's not what I was just talking about. I think...
Actually, let me add a word. In my years in government, I hired about 100 professionals over the years. I hired more African Americans than the Massachusetts Department of Education had done in the previous 100-odd years. I never once hired anybody on the basis of that person's race. I went out very hard and looked for people who were competent. I think we have to be careful to emphasize competence. It does nobody any favors if we take shortcuts on that. As department chairman, I have to make the final decisions about admitting graduate students. Again, if a person has overcome many obstacles, whether it be because of handicap or whether it be because of social class background or because of race or whatever, we certainly look extra hard at that individual and really try to assess. In the last analysis, though, we're not going to admit someone we don't think will be able to complete the program successfully. That would not be fair, and we don't do it.
Charles, could I just make one comment too? Esther, I think one of the real challenges, and another one that we haven't talked about at all, is social class. As I look at students who are, in terms of access to the university, and as students are preparing for the university, in some cases the amount of money that has gone into a student's education prior to even applying to this university, private education, tutorials, all kinds of things, and what do we do about trying to provide access for students regardless of race or gender to some extent, but from different socioeconomic levels. And I think that's a real challenge that we've got at this university.
And I would just add, BU has distinguished itself for having trained a wide range of distinguished leaders, both in Massachusetts and nationally. The fastest growing demographic is Hispanic. Looking at some very recent statistics, about 70% of white graduates of high schools graduate college ready in Massachusetts. Just under 40% of African American graduates are college ready, and only about 19% of Hispanic high school graduates in Massachusetts are college ready. If BU intends to continue to educate the next generations of leaders, it can't really do that with a race-blind or ethnicity-blind admissions policy that doesn't acknowledge that, in fact, extra efforts have to be made both before they enter and once they're here in order to graduate more Hispanics and other groups as part of BU's 4,000 graduates each year. Any school that intends to perpetuate itself into the future by continuing to train leaders that represent the demographics of this country are going to have to acknowledge the differences in advantage and disadvantage that exist as among different classes and ethnic groups, and do the things educationally that need to be done to simply perpetuate the school's position as a leader among higher education schools.
That's going to have to be the last word, and a good one, and hard questions as well. Could we please give our panelists a round of applause? I wanted to do something different with this panel, and I asked Jim Petosa, Professor Jim Petosa, and director of the School of Theater here at the College of Fine Arts, to actually put together the last word. He, in turn, went and found some students, and we decided we wanted to have students give the last word here. Students from the School of Theater from a wide range of backgrounds and walks of life, if you will. So you're about to see Duke Doyle, Ben Silverstein, Danya LaBelle, Tucker Sparkman, Kirby Mosley, Alicia Hunt, and Lee Evans give us the last word as it relates to this topic. So as we start to just clear the stage, I'm going to ask Lee Evans to come on up and give you a sense of how this was all put together. Lee?
Hello, everybody.
It's a School of Theater.
Yeah, School of Theater. I have to tell you all that we are so excited to be here. This has been an incredible day of huge ideas and lots of incredibly distinguished panelists that we feel so honored to be a part of. When Jim approached me about this topic, I felt incredibly jazzed about it, and also a little bit intrepid, because I know that this is a very complex issue that deals with things that are sensitive to all of us. And so I felt that when finding the group of people that we needed to make sure that our enthusiasm was enough to take the risk of discussing this topic that I think is inevitably risky. So we had a lot of discussion. There were about 15 people involved in the initial discussion that led up to this project. And what you will see now is a result of a lot of talking, a lot of hard thinking about our own personal experiences, our own personal opinions, but also our relationship to the macro ideas of what this issue means to all of us in the world and also in our university. Our ensemble of 7 is really excited to share with you something that we felt actually maybe didn't need, the candy, that actually maybe didn't need words. And so we have drawn on our physical theater roots to bring you this piece today. I'd also just like to say that we will be around afterwards and would love to be in dialogue with all of you about what this was for you. Thank you so much. so much. All the way back.
Thank you so much. We'll be hanging around for another stream.
Thanks, another great end. We appreciate you joining us, and thank you, thank you, thank you.
Before everybody leaves, I'd like to make the final remarks to close the fourth symposium. Those of you who weren't here earlier, as you saw, we saw four absolutely incredible, very distinct, very different efforts culminating in this magnificent final performance. I'd like to acknowledge the crucial role played by the inaugural committee in putting this together, particularly the co-chairs, Elaine Kirschenbaum and Roscoe Giles. This was organized through the Provost's office, but as you can imagine, this was not a top-down effort. It was bottom-up, and the four different, very different manifestations of the four important topics we dealt with show that. I'd like to thank all the people who were involved in making it possible to work, the staff in the Provost's office, the President's office, our security people, who obviously relaxed their rule on backpacks for this last session, the IT, AV, and creative services people. I'd like to thank all of you for attending, whether in person or virtually via the web. We've heard about our challenges and opportunities, and I think we're all looking forward to confronting these and seizing the opportunities under the leadership of President Brown. Thank you all for attending.